I've been all over the place, so I apologise to the previous speaker who didn't get a proper introduction. But this is Dan. He's come all the way from the far-flung reaches of
Cornwall.
Yes.
Cornwall, actually. I'm just over the border.
Okay, we've actually got multiple people that have come all that way today. So I'm very impressed with everyone's perseverance. But yeah, I am a bit of a fan of Dan's project called The Hit, which is going to tell you about now. It's got some really cool stuff going on, and hopefully you won't have all seen it before, because I think this deserves a lot more interest. I'm super excited. So I need a coffee. I'm so sorry. Take it away. Thank you very much.
Right. Hi everyone. My name's Dan, and for anyone who hasn't seen it, this is version 3 of The Hit. With music by Reverend Goff. This is actually where I was at a year and a half ago. I have since actually thrown away all of this and started again. But I will explain why when I come to it. As you can see, it's set in a city. You are given contracts and you have to go and kill people. And the reason I'm making this is because I am fascinated by narrative in video games. And this is pretty much the simplest narrative I could find. Assassin meets target, assassin kills target. It's actually inspired originally by Syndicate. I was playing Syndicate over 2 decades ago now, and imagining kind of what kind of games we'll have in the future. So you'll have to excuse me. I have crawled out of my dev cave for about the first time in over a year, so I'm not used to being around this many people. Yeah, in Syndicate, you control 4 agents as they carry out missions for a completely amoral mega corporation. And I kind of realised that the way video games are going, eventually we'd be all playing this in multiplayer, looking.
Yeah, I think it is on now. Sorry about
Cool.
that. I don't know.
No, I obviously managed to turn it off by throwing it on the floor. When it's thrown on the floor. But yeah, the industry actually took a slightly different direction. And one of my favourite quotes is from this book, The Art of Queen the Eye, which I actually want to read to you because it's, I think, one of the kind of biggest indicators of where the industry went, which is that a revolution is gathering place in the entertainment world. CD-ROM technology is bringing closer the dream of interactive movies, the dream of truly taking part in totally engrossing naturalistic worlds, of immersing yourself in a tidal wave of sound and vision. The flat, two-dimensional sprites of yesterday are dying. In their place, photo-quality graphics and breathtakingly alive motion capture models. While the realism, the images and the dynamics of movement draw you in, the music and sound arouses your emotion. Games are becoming an art form, which is obviously rubbish, because if games are an art form, the sound and the vision has nothing to do with it. It's the interactivity is where the art lies. But the increasing resemblance to movies is actually giving games some legitimacy in the public eye, that they are an expressive medium and can tell a story. But this is kind of a superficial kind of narrative telling. Actually, a massitive tangent that I'm going to go off on now about the history of art, which is that art has come from, we've basically developed from symbolic to representational and abstract art. And we often kind of see this as a technological progression, that we have improved our art from symbolic to representational, etc. And this finds its way into games because as the games become more visually complex, we make more and more representational art that looks more and more real, but we kind of stop there because that's as far as Hollywood movies make it. They show us the object, but we don't actually get to interact with pretty much 99% of the environment in Call of Duty or Halo or Grand Theft Auto, or pick a AAA game. And the reasons are obvious. Studios don't have infinite budgets, and computers aren't infinitely fast, and we need to create a fun experience in the most impressive way possible. So we limit the amount of interaction that isn't directly related to the core gameplay. And we try and show the depth of the world and the story and the characters in cutscenes, where the characters can do anything, say anything, and interact with the world and each other in ways that the player can't. Which means that the narrative aspects of games are limited to sequences which don't involve the player, that aren't interactive, and are consequently less engaging. They give us a break in the action and a chance to breathe, but there's a very strong disconnect between the actions that you do in the game and the actions that your character does in the cutscenes. There are a few games which offer incredibly rich interaction spaces, but they tend to be less accessible, more cerebral games, like Dwarf Fortress or Ultima Ratio Regum, which are fascinating, but probably aren't going to capture the public attention as much as Grand Theft Auto does, at the moment at least. And there's a paradox that in order to create rich player stories, you need a very rich possibility space. But the more possibilities the player has, the more you lose authorial control over the experience, the less you are able to tell your story. I remember the original Deus Ex. You could jump on the desks of your UNATC superior, and he would just completely ignore you. Most games now kind of take away some control of the player. They'll either not let you jump or not let you do stupid things around other characters, or they'll give you some mind interaction, like you have to keep the same walking pace as the character, which is just enough interaction to keep you busy, but not enough to give you space to arse around. So yeah, the hit is basically my attempt.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure. If you have access to that.
Yes. I'll start throwing some pictures up in a minute. I've basically been thinking about how to tell stories in a completely interactive space. And I wrote an article on that was featured on Gamer Sutra about a year and a half ago, that I should probably throw up a link to at the end of this. And that's and the hit is my attempt to create a space where I can start to build this, what I call a player-driven dynamic narrative engine. Basically I've been watching the games industry kind of go away from creating rich possibility spaces, kind of turn away from like the holodeck, where you can get to make your own stories, and more into channeling kind of Michael Bay style intense experiences where you actually have very, very linear paths and very limited interaction. But I think there has to be a way. So a few years ago, I basically started trying to figure out my own version. And I started building a Minecraft-style city. Gave the player a gun and some people to shoot, lots of people to shoot, and some cops. I eventually threw this version away because the voxel style engine just didn't give me enough fidelity and enough complexity to create an interesting urban environment. So I actually scrapped the idea of having interior locations for a while. is that the one screenshot I've got of this version? I did have a PDF somewhere with a half a dozen screenshots that shows the core game loop, but I've obviously lost that one at some point. So yeah, I managed to create a big city, multiple players, hundreds of characters, and that version eventually developed into version 3, which is that version you just saw in the video. At the moment, this is all still trying to build the world where I can set the stories in. I haven't actually got around to writing the stories yet, because I'm trying to build. Yeah, this is how many characters I can throw into it. I'm trying to build the tools to create the stories at the same time, because one of the things I absolutely want is for people to take this and make their own versions. I'm going to try and expose as many systems as I possibly can. So you'll be able to eventually create your own set of laws for your city, your own kind of ethnic ranges. So you can basically personalise the city exactly how you want. And at the moment, I've thrown away these static meshes, and I'm trying to. I'm building a procedurally generated system along with a bunch of editing tools. Should probably show you that. Yeah, this is version 4. What's a nice screenshot? Yeah, I'm basically trying to make it so you can create your own buildings. This is all just various development screenshots, and then blow them up, of course. And yeah, your own city, you'll be able to personalise it all you can. That's the latest NPCs. I'm trying to get everything up to the same graphical quality that version 3 was, but making it completely dynamic. But it's been a long, slow process that I'm slowly coming to the end of, but I'm not quite yet. One of the reasons I am nervous about coming up here is because I'm not quite ready to show this off yet. Everything is at a stage where it's almost working, but I'm constantly refining this at the moment and iterating on all the systems kind of at once, which is fun because there's a lot of systems. Yeah, my development process is not one I would advise anybody else to take on. I'm basically working on about 50 different systems at once and jumping back and forth between them and trying to find as much equivalence as I can between each of the systems because this will need to handle an awful lot of data, especially in multiplayer when you're making changes. Everything has to be as condensed as possible. I actually spent 4 years working at the Coast Guard, where I ended up rewriting some database systems, and the beacons, the emergency beacons they have on board boats, have a very, very, very small set of data that they can send, and you have to cram as much information as possible. So I got quite a bit of practice in how to fit lots of information into very small spaces. And I'm using procedural techniques to try and maximise that as much as possible. Each city at the moment is generated from a single seed value, same as Minecraft. So that if you play multiplayer, you can share the same city just by exchanging one number. All of the pedestrian paths and styles, and eventually, once I've programmed them in, all their personalities and histories and traits will be generated at the same time. So basically, yeah, you will be able to share a huge complex environment just by throwing the same number at each of the computers, which is handy. Yeah, you'll have to excuse me. I'm coming to the end of an incredibly intense period where I have had to spend the last week trying to condense everything that I'm doing into a form that I can actually talk about, because I tend to live in a state of complete uncertainty most of the time, and I kind of have to go through a process of figuring out what the hell I'm doing. In order to talk about it, which is also one of the reasons I haven't actually written anything about it for over a year now. I'm basically trying to refigure out how to make games from scratch, and how to make systems that will allow me to change anything in a very, very short space of time. My ideal system is that you'll sit at a computer logged in with half a dozen other people, and you'll spend an hour or two walking around kind of going, right, that building should go there, no, it should have more columns, no, it should be bigger, no, more modern, and building the spaces for the game that you want and the city that you want. Because ultimately I'm actually more interested in playing your version of the game than mine. So I basically want to make it as easy to make something interesting as I can. Because I have a story that I want to write, that I will get around to writing as soon as I've written the typewriter. But I don't have any illusions that I'm the world's best writer, and I'm fairly certain there are at least half a dozen people in this room who will write a better game, a better story than I will. So yeah, I'm trying to make the tools as easy as possible to have as little friction. Because I think it's one of the other problems with the way video games are made, is that there is this enormous gap between actually writing the story, writing what you want the game to be, and having playable code. In the case of AAA games, it is usually several years. You either bring the writer in at the start, who says what the game should be, and then it goes to concept artists, and then it goes through a long series of process, and hundreds of people will have had their voice in the process by the end of it. And I'm trying to get to the point where one person can kind of sit down and end up with playable code in the space of a few hours or a few days. Because then I think we'll start to get better stories. I remember watching my first Kurosawa film when I was 13, and being utterly blown away by the fact that everything kind of cohered into this one absolutely perfect experience, in the way that Western films absolutely do not, because we have this studio system where you have so many specialists working, and you have strong directors, you have really, really good directors who have a really good authorial voice, and they can basically get people to perform miracles. But compared to Kurosawa, these guys are amateurs, because Kurosawa was involved in every single part of the process. He knew exactly what was going on, and it shows in every second of his movies. And we don't have that in games. Most AAA games are incredibly chaotic, to put it mildly. So yeah, basically I'm just trying to write a system where I will eventually end up playing the games that I want to play, and making it as easy as I can for everyone to write them. Right, does anybody have any questions? Because I think I'm about done. Again, sorry for being nervous and having absolutely no idea what I'm doing here, but I am in a state of total chaos that Mike has just dragged me out of in order to come up here and speak to you.
Thank you so much for being dragged out
Thank you for inviting me.
Please.
Hi. It looks like you're still working on the tools to create like the states that the story takes place in. How are you to use tools for actually creating the stories?
The city, it's kind of hard to talk about because I don't really have an analog for it. The city is basically a brain that thinks in stories. Every event that happens, whether it's walking down the street, crossing the road, a car parking, is a story event. And I am writing ways for an AI to, for players to basically design sequences of events. So you can say, this is a sequence. A car doesn't stop at a pedestrian crossing, somebody comes along. And I'm basically creating nested sets of stories where you can say, this kind of, the story I'm writing needs this event to happen. These things need to happen in order for this event to happen. So the game will basically force certain events, lead the player in order to picking certain options. So it can force events so that an author can actually write a story and say the events it wants. It will fudge some, it will force others. It's one of the reasons I'm setting in a city with thousands of characters is so that if the game needs a grey wizard to come along and bring you a magic ring, he can walk out of a shop and say, I'm your old friend, here's the magic ring. Does that answer your question?
Yes. I've been following Chris Crawford's work.
Yes.
And it seems like you are having a better chance of facing this specifically.
I think so, but I'm fascinated by his work as well.
Yeah, so cool.
Any other questions?
So, stories that people write with the tools that you're making, are they linear stories or branching stories?
Yes. They will be. I'm still writing the tool, so I can't say for sure exactly how this is going to work. But ultimately, I want it to be as linear or as branching as you want. And you will control how much freedom the director has to replace the events with other events, and how quickly you want them to be forced. This is also a way to control pacing by saying that an event hasn't happened for 10 minutes, let's force an event onto the player. So the next shop they walk into, there's going to be somebody holding up the guy at the counter with a gun.
And does one person pay the story or multiple people pay for it?
I'm trying to design it, I'm trying to make it sort of multiplayer. The way it's going to work is actually going to work better, hopefully, if it's multiplayer. But yeah, I will tell you when I get there.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah.
One more question before we run away. I saw there was a file there called in-game beards. Can we see that?
Yes, my beard system isn't very far along. I actually have a cellular automata system that is going to design beards. At the moment, I've got it making Space Invaders, which there might be a screenshot there. Which folder? That one. Can't believe I lost my beards. Look, there are no beards.
In your episodes you had very British looking police, and now you switched to kind of more American style. Is there a reason why you picked?
Yes, because I actually wanted a very, very particular style of policeman. The cop in that picture, it's not actually a police uniform. It's actually a German SS uniform that I've made to look like a police uniform. You can probably tell by the jackboots. I don't want this to be a friendly cop, which is one reason I chose an American cop.
Okay. I probably should let everyone escape, but of course, all of our sequels will be in the break, unless you want to. So, we're going to have about a half hour break now, and I'll put on a slide showing what seats are coming up next if you're going to. If you'd like some coffee and biscuits, which is all of you, head out of the doors at the back, and then go down the spiral staircase, and then there should be some coffee and biscuits there. If I will be hanging around, bug me if you'd like one of our Wi-Fi keys. We don't have the loads, so we've got some. Hopefully they'll work. And we'll see you about half an hour. Thank you very much.
Thank you.